Thank you, Bernd. Thank you, everybody. Miguel Alonso, Global PLM at DZS. Today, joining you from the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to be talking about our views of what we see as driving the current and next generation of PON deployments based on our observations and interactions with our customers worldwide. As a means of an introduction, I think this is going to be just a commonly held set of truths as to what has been driving the massive adoption of PON over the last 8 to 10 years and what's really moving us into the next wave of 10G plus class PON implementations. From a services point of view, it's clearly the ongoing and ever-growing adoption of the cloud as the way to compute and run every single application that is necessary. There's also the more and more set of connected devices that require that high bandwidth connectivity and low latency connectivity to the cloud for them to be viable for their users. And then the availability of mobility and 5G with ultra low latency deployments, as well as a drive to densification by deploying smaller and smaller cells throughout the world. And then from a technology point of view, fiber obviously offers a virtually unlimited capacity waveguide. And from a standards point of view, I think what we're seeing is a set of drivers that through disaggregation and open solutions are really moving forwards, not just focusing on the lowering of the CapEx necessary to deploy fiber networks, but also the OpEx that is associated with that. So all these obviously concludes on what's been driving PON deployments, what will drive the next generation of deployments. We are seeing, and I should have mentioned, 5G as being a significant driver for the next generation of or next class of PON deployments, and we'll be talking about our observations there pretty heavily. Just taking some data from recent Omdia reports, so thank you, Julie, for putting these reports together. But I think it's important to highlight a couple of things when we look at the PON equipment revenue forecast. Two things. First of all, it's growing. We're, as an industry, back to a place where starting this year, the year-over-year growth for PON deployments is positive as opposed to flat or negative, how it had been in prior generations or years. And then the other element that I think it's important to highlight is to see how, when you look at 2021, this is the year where we're going through sort of the tipping point or crossover point between, I'm going to call traditional PON deployments, so GPON earlier generations, and 10 gig plus deployments. And by 2022, clearly the expectation is that 10 gig class PON is going to eclipse those older generations of PON. So really, when you look at the forecasts from the analysts, there is clearly a view that the time for the next generation of PON services is here, and it's now, and it's happening very quickly, which matches obviously our observations as we work with our customer base. When we look at drivers for what is driving the next generation of PON deployments, one of the things we look at is the shift from macro cells to small cells. So look, we've had customers, and it's been a commonly held use of PON to use PON for mobile backhaul, primarily where you have scarcity of fiber. Now, as you move to smaller cell sites, the cost of the backhaul portion of that deployment is relatively much larger relative to the overall spend than it was with macro cells. So when you put that into consideration with also the fiber efficiency afforded by PON, we do believe that the trend and move towards small cells and 5G is going to continue to accelerate the demand and the need for 10 gig class PON services. Likewise, when we look at Openrun, we see an acceleration of adoption of Open RAN deployments across the world. And I think there are two elements that point to a potential positive impact on PON deployments associated with Open RAN adoption acceleration. The first one, obviously, the reason Open RAN is gaining momentum is when you look at the left-hand side of this chart is because from an operational or OpEx efficiency point of view, Open RAN-based deployments are significantly more OpEx efficient than traditional RAN deployments. And on the right-hand side of the chart, what I'm trying to show is that when you look at the cost of deploying Open RAN versus traditional models in high-density scenarios, it's actually not that different. And actually, Open RAN is slightly disadvantaged, which when you put all this data together, it's telling you that Open RAN is going to really have extraordinary advantages when you look at deployment of next generation mobile services in rural markets. So you put those two together, and once again, PON comes as a very good vehicle to deliver those services based on those cost scenarios. Now, when we look at our customer base, we do so from the vantage point of offering products to our customers that fulfill the needs of traditional wireline service providers. Where I'm showing up on the upper side of the slide with traditional broadband, residential and commercial services. But we also have a significant set of our business that has to do with helping our service provider fulfill the needs of mobile backhaul, mobile transport networks, front haul, mid haul, and backhaul. So as we look at our customer base and observe how they are doing and deploying PON and XGS PON, we do have that perspective that allows us to see both sides of the world, fixed and wireline as well as wireless implementations. And it's already a reality. So the deployments of 10 gig class services is happening today across our customer base throughout the world. So in the Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Asia, I'm showing you some representative examples of service providers that are doing XGS PON or 10 gig class PON services for fixed wireline type services. And then likewise, when you look at a significant part of our customer base is made up of service providers that are leading the transformation and the implementation of 5G based mobile networks. Now, we've been working with these service providers in some cases all the way back to the 3G days of mobile networks, doing the mid-haul and backhaul. And now we are continuing to work with them as we work through the evolution into 5G and really very sophisticated ways of doing front hauling hybrid networks. We have legacy as well of 5G networks. And it's important to highlight that in some of these cases, XGS PON has become a preferred vehicle for them to be able to do the backhaul of the mobile traffic, now providing them the capacity that they need for those higher speed services. Now, we see this trend continuing. I think we're probably just at the beginning of, and as you look at these charts, you see how the optical fiber-based 5G expenditure continues to grow year over year significantly. So we are hitting this, if you will, with the extent of our product portfolio, right? WDM, active Ethernet, direct point-to-point fibers, PON, and future PON technologies. Because look, frankly, as we look at what needs to be done to accomplish everything, PON is going to be a very significant part of how to enable that 4G, 5G small cell site transport. And then the other thing that we're observing, which is, I think, very interesting, and I'd like to share with the team here and the audience, is many of these service providers, as they use, for example, XGS PON for mobile backhaul, they're also using the PON drops from that XGS PON to feed either individual buildings or businesses, or in some cases to develop PON drops inside tall buildings, and then in each one of those, in those buildings, for example, as I'm showing on the upper side of the screen, putting floor switches to feed small cells or Wi-Fi 6 systems. So extending the reach of the wireless network through a PON extension, if you will, into the building. And then we're also starting to see some interest in leveraging 5G, fixed wireless access devices to also extend inside building coverage, but really to highlight the PON, right? The extension of PON and XGS-PON, not just for mobile backhaul, but also to deliver services to business subscribers by many of our customers. And then just to close, I think this dovetails nicely into what Julie was covering earlier. I think we're in the very early innings of XGS-PON deployments today. Frankly, I think we have a number of years in front of us to continue to grow the deployments of XGS-PON. But as an industry, we're already focusing on looking at what's next from a technology point of view. So I think Julie did a really good job of covering what is the situation between 25G PON versus 50G PON. We, as an equipment vendor, are obviously participating in both. We understand that there are use cases in which 25G PON and sooner than later are going to be important. So we're participating in those standards bodies, the MSA groups, to make sure that we are not only influencing, but also participating and moving those standards forward. We're also working on innovation around adapting PON to support front haul transport requirements where low latency is important. So that's an area of, I think, extensibility of PON applications and deployments that is in front of us from a future point of view. And then, as I mentioned earlier, right, the ongoing design to influence device roadmaps, to do proof of concepts with service providers, and really look and feel collaboration to validate the different architectures.